Welcome to Back to the Decade. I am Thomas Adams. I'm here with Nick Hoffman. How's it going, Nick?
What's up?
So this is going to be our first podcast recording. We're trying our hand at this podcast craze. And the format that we're going for is going to be a little fast and loose. We're going to be rewinding 10 years to look back and reminisce on pop culture of the past, reflect on stuff that impacted us from 10 years ago. A lot of content's going to focus on movies, the film industry, TV, music, sports, all kinds of stuff. As we get going, the topics will hopefully be limitless. All that being said, I think it'll be good to start things off by going back 10 years into our own lives and looking at where we were in 2010, what we were doing, what kinds of media we were taking interest in. So, Nick, how about you start us off by reflecting on the 2010 Nick Hoffman?
Yeah, man. I was very much in my mid-20s at that point. I was 26. Didn't really care about much in the world except for myself and the things that I was interested in, as you should at that age. I was running a restaurant in Peachtree City, Georgia, that we actually had a lot of tie to the film industry at the time too, because there was a lot of stuff being shot in Peachtree City at that time, and we had all kinds of actors, directors coming in all the time, and I would get to talk to them and stuff, which was pretty cool.
Now, was Atlanta where it is now in terms of film hub, or was it, did it grow a little bit?
It was really
that time?
It was taking off for sure. Now it's way more established, but it was absolutely like you could feel it like taking off.
Because that area, it's south of the city, right? And that's sort of close to where Marvel.
It's right where Pinewood
sets there.
It's like
studio up.
It's like 5 or 6 miles, I think, from Pinewood Studios or something like that, which is in Fayetteville.
Yeah, so back then they would have just been unrolling that giant franchise. You probably had, I think 2010.
That's when Iron Man 2 came out.
Iron Man 2 came out. They just had kicked it off, gearing up for the Avengers. They're probably filming the Avengers. In Atlanta right around that time.
Yeah, and it was, so basically, a lot of my time was spent with, I was obsessed with movies, as I always had been. I went to school for video production, and I was actually still in school at that time, because I graduated in 2012. So yeah, I was still in school, I was studying a lot of film theory even, so I remember that around that year I was taking classes like Kubrick and Kieslowski,
oh, sweet.
Yeah, a class about those two, kind of like interconnecting them and their movies. And then I did...
Were you familiar with them before you took that class, or was that sort of
very much with Kubrick, not as much with Kieslowski, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of read a book about him and caught up a little bit. But also a class where we would do adaptations from book to movie. So we did Virgin Suicides, Ghost World. It was an interesting time, and I was doing, I was doing a lot of film theory, and I took a class on baseball movies. The entire class was just baseball movies.
So Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams was in
Bull
there.
Durham.
Bull Durham, which is my all-time favorite baseball movie. And then, I wasn't as into TV shows at that time. I was sort of against the whole, the wave of, this binge, Netflix and chill. I was like, I just watched movies, and so I didn't really watch that much television shows, but very much into sports. I was a huge Laker fan, and obviously with it being the year Kobe Bryant died, which was pretty rough, but I was a obsessive Kobe Bryant fan and Laker fan in general, so that was the year they won their last championship, which we're going to talk about later on in the show.
It'll be something interesting to look back on, obviously as part of Kobe's legacy, but just in terms of the NBA in general, how it, I feel like that's right around the time the NBA took off on this cycle of, the superstar driving the franchises. You have the, Boston's Big Three assembles a couple years before that, and they start to set the tone for these super teams that were forming, and that's when, Kobe wins his last title, but LA kind of falls out of favor for a long time, and now they're finally back in the mix. Of course,
and I was totally against the super team. I hated it.
Yeah, the Heat really frustrated me, especially as someone that is from Central Florida. and knew a lot of people that were Miami Heat fans, it was hard to not accuse them of falling onto a bandwagon that was created by the decision, which was 2010.
Yeah, I hated
that happened.
I hated LeBron James at the time. I thought, the whole decision thing was totally like off-putting, and I didn't like him before because I was always such a big Kobe fan, and people always wanted to compare the two and see who's better, and I'm like, nope, Kobe.
Yeah.
And then he did that. I was like, nah, screw this guy. But also, another reason I really hated super teams was because in 2003 is when the Lakers got Karl Malone and Gary Payton.
Yeah.
For no reason. They were...
Well, they lost to Detroit, right?
They were already a dynasty. So,
Yeah.
they won in 99, 2000, 2001. So, 2002, I guess 2003 and 2004 season was where they had that super team, and Karl Malone and Gary Payton totally, like, did unnecessary additions to that team. So that's why in 2010, when you saw this trend with the Heat, and
eventually it would be Golden State.
Other teams, and you're just like, oh my God.
And I think we're still kind of in that time now. It's just, I think you're going to see more teams assemble it at the same time.
Well, they're sort of doing it with the Lakers. I mean,
it's
got LeBron and AD, but I mean, not as much because
it takes you back to the Kobe and Shaq dynamic that the two of them had, and they had good chemistry around them, and that's in a way what LA's building now. They don't have any other stars besides those two, but they have good players, good chemistry surrounding the two big guys.
But what's interesting is that now this wouldn't happen 10 years ago, but I guess maybe it kind of did with the Heat, but really the players more so have more power to orchestrate these teams, right? Like LeBron went to LA. He very much brought AD. Like, remember AD like sitting out games and stuff because he was just
forcing his way to a better team.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, it's interesting in the context of what we're doing here because the NBA has just pressed pause for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And we don't know if this season's going to finish or not. It was one of the more fascinating seasons we were having because there wasn't a de facto super team that was just presumed to win. You had 3 or 4 solid teams that were coming together to potentially make a run at a championship, and maybe we were going to have this contested run to the finals. Will it happen now? I don't know, but I think that it makes what we're doing here all the more interesting because when we were talking about this idea, we had no idea what was coming with the coronavirus, and that we could have pop culture literally just stop. There's no sports, there's no movies even being released. This is going to be
everything we're talking about today. Is everything that's been canceled recently.
Right. It's going to be such a weird thing 10 years from now to look back at the schedule and why did nothing come out between March and May, like late May? What happened? And then the world was in a panic.
Yeah, everyone tune in 10 years from now, 2030, and we'll talk all about it.
Let's just hope that everyone's healthy and okay at that time.
Yeah.
That's first priority, but
that's crazy, man.
It is a weird time that we're living in for sure.
If you can take any positives from this whole crazy pandemic and everything, it's that it's kind of helping kickstart this new podcast that we're doing because
we got time.
We're quarantined and we got nothing
and we
else
have
to do.
Plenty of time to watch movies and revisit,
to reflect. Yeah,
some of the things that we may have blind spots over. There's certainly some movies from this year that I'm excited to check out. I think as we go forward,
if we get to see them,
I think as we go forward, we're going to try our best to line up our releases with the time of year in which those movies were coming out back then.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of in the spring right now, which tends to be, at least in my experience, it's a bit of a lull in the schedule because studios are ramping up for summer. I know that Marvel's kind of pushing the summer movie season forward, releasing their movies in late April now, as opposed to Memorial Day, which I always thought that was like the kickoff of summer movie season.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's coming forward, and there's some good movies that were slated to come out in the next month that we're just not going to get for a while.
Yep,
I was stoked for No Time to Die, and that's going to be a conversation for November.
Yep.
Now,
so maybe we should talk about, to kind of kick off where we're going to be focusing on with the podcast, is we can sort of throw out some of these movies we'll be talking about over the next few episodes, and some of the movies that we really loved in 2010.
Yeah, I think, although maybe I'll go back for a second and I'll talk about myself in 2010.
Sorry.
Before,
I
I completely went on a tangent there and forgot to come back to my story.
Have we mentioned our age differences yet?
I have not. So that's something that I was just going to bring up. It'll be interesting to see if we have about a 9-year age difference, and whether or not that affects the kind of media we were consuming. I guess that remains to be seen.
But Thomas is 12 and I'm 21.
Yeah.
No,
so 2010, I was 17, wrapping up my junior year of high school, and that was a big year for me. I met my now wife that year. We were high school sweethearts, and we just started going out probably later into the year. So some of my first big movie dates will be talked about probably more so in October range. Huh. But this time I just started a film program at my high school, and this is right around the time where I got into filmmaking, started to take film seriously as a craft as opposed to just something that I enjoyed. I remember my teacher at the time showing me Psycho, and
classic.
I was always a movie buff, but I was never as invested in classic cinema.
Right. And
when I saw Psycho, it just ignited this thing in me of wow, this is from, at the time, 50 years ago. It was its 50th anniversary, and it just felt so present to me as a 17-year-old at a high school in Sarasota, Florida. And it kicked off this fascination with filmmaking and Alfred Hitchcock, and I went down this rabbit hole of his movies, kind of like you were doing with Kubrick at the time.
Yep.
And yeah, I just remember that being a big year for me because Inception was that year, which is a movie that we'll talk more in depth about this summer. But I saw that movie with my friends, and it's the only movie that physically forced me to get up out of my chair.
Yeah.
I was so enamored by the end of it and that final shot that I stood up and exclaimed, "What?" towards the screen, and then I just sat down and clapped. And I was a Dark Knight fan. I was familiar with Christopher Nolan's movies, but nothing until Inception had ignited this recognition of the filmmaker. And that's something I became more conscious of, I think, as I got older, was the authors behind these movies and their voices and the things they had to say.
How things are actually getting made. You're starting to recognize
that.
And
and I think with Inception, I knew it was the guy that made The Dark Knight, but I don't think I really paid attention to the name Christopher Nolan, and now the name Christopher Nolan is as important to me above a title as Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
Because when that movie came out, that's the star, but was so amazing.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt's
one of his first big roles.
His revisioning of himself, really. I mean, that was where he started to come back from. He was popular
from
on
Third Rock from the Sun. Yeah.
And then
he had 500 Days of Summer shortly before that.
That was he was really hitting a peak right there, I think.
Yeah,
because he was working with what's his name too, the guy that did Brick. And
Rian Johnson.
Yeah. He recently directed a Star Wars movie now. So.
Yeah, and Nolan's developed this brand for himself where he's as important as the star above the title, which is kind of cool. Just wanted to make it colder in here.
Right. Yeah.
You're good.
So we were talking about Inception. What also is cool is with Inception coming out 10 years ago, now this summer we have Tenet, which to me looks most like the most Inception like movie that he's done since.
I'm excited for that. I think
I'm pumped for it, dude.
He's always had this fascination with time, and I think that movie is going to be Time the movie. It's kind of what it seems like.
Yeah.
I've heard that the whole thing's a palindrome, and I just hope that movie theaters are open again for that to come out.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully everything's not going to just start getting released on Netflix, and this is like the end of theater cinema as we know it. Like, that's the worst case scenario.
I hope not. I imagine that we'll correct ourselves as time goes on here.
Yeah.
But let's think about, because that's going to be part of this process is, we're going to do our best to keep up to date on the time of year in which things were coming out. Like, now it's March, so we would focus on spring releases. And
which Shutter Island came out in March, right? I'm pretty sure that was a
I
March
think that
release.
was a February.
Was it February?
That's what the internet's for. Shutter Island was... Where are you at?
And I think Shutter Island can sort of kick off what we're trying to do here is, going back to the movies that really had a big impact on our lives at the time. And
February 19th.
Wow. So it was released during like all the trash.
Yeah, it was. And Shutter Island's a fascinating one because it's a Scorsese, but it's not like the genre he typically works in.
I think that reason alone, I was reluctant to even go see it because I didn't see it in the theater. I'm pretty sure I saw it.
I did because I'm just like a big Leo.
I wish I had
stan.
I think I ended up seeing it later in the year. Like I think more around like fall, like October. I think I wanted to watch it when it was like kind of like scary,
Yeah.
So and then of course I was blown away, and I was like, what was I thinking? Like
it's a weird time to release a movie like that, but.
I was confused when it got. I was like, "This is Scorsese," and it's like,
is it top 5 Martin Scorsese? Probably not, but it's a good.
That being said, Martin Scorsese's never made a bad movie, so in my opinion,
he's pretty, he's pretty hard to miss on.
But also, a lot of people, and one of these movies that kind of goes under Scorsese's radar for people is Cape Fear, and a lot of people.
Yeah, that's one I've actually never seen.
Yeah, and I feel like I've watched some of it. I can't even say if I've seen the whole movie because it was one of those movies that came out when I was a kid, and it'd be on TV sometimes. So, but I hear a lot of people comparing the two there because that was also a type of film that at the time Scorsese was like, he's the gangster, biopic flick guy.
He wasn't really making that kind of movie.
No, so Cape Fear again was. I think those movies are sort of like parallel to one another.
This is. I think obviously that movie didn't end up having any sort of awards conversation, which is interesting for Scorsese because we just came off The Irishman. He had tons of nominations for that movie. It falls a little more into the genre he works within, but I think it's more so emblematic of the Academy's perversion towards horror in general. They don't typically award that type of movie. I think maybe they are now a little more with Get Out, and even Parasite kind of works within this genre. I think that's a little more unsettling.
I think there really is something to movies being released at that time too. People forget about them.
Yeah,
they're just like, nah.
Which is what makes this is like unrelated to 2010, but I've always found What Happened with Silence of the Lambs fascinating for that reason. That's a movie that came out Valentine's Day weekend.
I did not know that.
In 1991, and it, that's a movie that came out before the Oscars of its previous year, and then a whole 12 months later, it wins Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay.
Wow. One
of the only movies to ever do that. So that's, I think that's just kind of like a weird moment in time, which one of my favorite movies ever. So I have no problem. I have no problem with that, but it's just kind of interesting that that's...
When Get Out came out in like March or something, didn't it?
It was February.
It was February? Wow, all these February movies. All right.
Yeah, it was February. I remember I saw Get Out on the weekend of the 2017 Oscars.
Yeah.
Where the whole Moonlight La La Land mix-up happened. And I mean, at the time, I loved that movie, but I don't think I thought that this is going to be an Oscars player.
No,
the following year.
But we'll talk about that in 2027.
We'll talk about that in 7 years.
So we were talking about Shutter Island, and we got
Shutter Island.
Inception.
You know, around that time, I distinctly remember we had a lot of crap movies, like Alice in Wonderland had come out that year. One of the worst movies I've ever seen in theaters, to be honest. And I went and saw that because
I had no desire to see it. But you were younger than me. You were like
I was
26.
Yeah, I was 17, and it was
Alice in Wonderland.
It was something that, you know, my friends wanted to go and see, and that was.
Were you guys high at least?
No, no. We were coming out. We were coming on the back end of like a triple feature that day, where we saw a Matt Damon, Paul Greengrass joint called Green Zone.
Oh yeah, I never saw it.
Which I could not tell you a single thing about, even though I've seen it.
It looked like a Born wannabe or something.
I don't remember anything about it. We saw that. We saw Alice in Wonderland, and then we saw She's Out of My League, which I was.
That's good.
Yeah, I was astonished to find that was my favorite movie by far of that day's viewing experience.
I don't think I saw that until maybe the year later or something.
Yeah,
but
it's a funny movie. I mean, that's T.J. Miller kind of getting his start.
And another cool thing about this podcast is we're honestly, and I kind of did this for a reason, is I waited till today to really go back and look, even though we kind of did this like weeks and weeks ago. But going back now and looking, I'm seeing all these movies that like, wow. I mean, 127 Hours. I vividly remember seeing in the theater by myself. Had a great effect on me.
Yeah, that's James Franco's best performance, in my opinion, is that movie. And Danny Boyle's, you know, a great director as well.
Yeah, The Town was everyone was talking about The Town. Book of Eli, like, I mean, I didn't see that in the theater, but people loved it. Tron, Hot Tub Time Machine. But yeah, just going back and seeing all these movies is kind of the fun of this podcast. And
there's things that exist in the podcast world right now, like the rewatchables,
which is a big inspiration for us.
Yeah,
to Bill Simmons and his friends.
The Ringers got a lot of great content.
Yeah, we love it.
You know, when they call back to certain movies, it's always kind of interesting to, you know, think about when those movies came out, and there's obviously a lot of rewatchables that came from that year.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we'll get into a lot of them closer to Oscar season, which tends to be like October to December.
It'll be a fun time.
You know, for the early part of the year, going back to Alice in Wonderland, I remember the reason that was kind of a big deal is 2010 is right around the time where 3D tech is taking off in film.
Which I hate, and I hated it at the time.
And it's, you know, it's never been something that really stuck, but a lot of movies tried to, like, incorporate that shtick. Avatar's chief among them. That was such a big moment, I think, in large part because...
Which actually looked pretty cool in 3D.
Yeah, many people at the time were like, this movie is finally done 3D right.
Right. And for someone that hated 3D, it wasn't really for that in theaters. I was actually pretty impressed with Avatar.
And I think that's why that movie took off so much, is that it became this, like, you have to go see it in a theater. You have to experience the visuals for yourself. Because it was, you know, it was like a moment in time for tech. You know, people had to go see it. And it's not necessarily, to my recollection, the best movie. And I don't find it to be relevant to this day, personally.
Except for the fact that 2, 3, and 4 are coming out in like a year.
Yeah, so they keep saying, I'll believe it when it happens. Like,
yeah, I guess we can talk about that.
The Avatar franchise was apparently preparing for coronavirus long before anything else. Because they just keep delaying and postponing everything they do.
Apparently a lot of it's in the can, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And that's, you know, I know that Disney World did a whole park dedicated to it, but it's not something that comes up in my conversations very often. And I will be interested, you know, I think next episode we're going to try to watch it again and talk about it and think back on that movie. Yeah, to see if it holds up today.
And for the viewers, just to explain, with Avatar, it did not come out in 2010. It came out in late 2009. But, as you said, it held... How long was it in 2010?
I looked it up. It was the number one movie at the box office from January 1st until March 13th.
Wow. in 2010.
In 2010, it just controlled the box office for the entire first quarter of the year.
So it's very much relevant to.
And I saw it in 2010. I think most people probably saw it in 2010 because it was like a Christmas release.
Yeah, I didn't see it because I wasn't that excited about it because I don't know what the reason was really, but I didn't see it until probably January. So
yeah,
I'm sure I was part of that box office run, but I do remember seeing it in theater and in 3D, which I kind of just forced myself to do it because I had heard that's just what they were going for. So I wanted to see that they succeeded, and I was actually really impressed. Actually, the movie itself I was okay with, but the technology and the 3D was what really impressed me.
Yeah, it was new. It was something that we hadn't experienced before, and that gave people a reason to see it, and they kept bringing their friends to see it for the same reasons that they wanted to experience it with groups of people and then talk about it afterwards. And I think those types of things have existed since, like your Star Wars and your Marvel, but that's more so for the story and the narrative that people were wanting to see unfold, whereas I honestly couldn't tell you what Avatar's about. I remember vague things, but I'll be interested to check that out again. Going off of that 3D tech. I want to talk about Shutter Island next week and Avatar, but the other movie that I distinctly remember as being a big moment for me when I saw it was How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah,
which was. It was this
which
DreamWorks.
Just wrapped this year.
Yeah, it just wrapped.
Or last year.
It just wrapped its trilogy. But I'm a big Pixar fan. I go see all those movies, and because of our age difference, I probably fall more into a window where like '90s Disney shaped a lot of the things that I took interest in. But with How to Train Your Dragon, it was this DreamWorks animation thing. Not necessarily a brand associated with great film, because let's face it, Shrek can be kind of funny, but it's not great cinema either.
No, yeah.
But How to Train Your Dragon, I think, from a technical standpoint, it's hard to explain, but the 3D technology that they incorporated during the flying sequences felt like a ride.
Yeah, I didn't see it in the theater, so I don't think I saw it later, a year or two later maybe.
I remember. It's an amazing score.
And we're seeing the age difference here too, right? Because you're
right.
seeing stuff like How to Train Your Dragon
in theaters,
in the theater, where I'm like 26 and I'm like, I'll see it when it comes on TV.
Yeah, and I think that was something where like I definitely paid more attention to film news as I got older, but I remember hearing about the 3D in that movie and how it was worth checking out. So I wanted to check it out, and those flying sequences are really just something else.
Also, I don't know, just to go a little bit off the movie topic, is not only will we be tackling great cinema of the year, or not so great cinema, but the music of that year was fantastic.
Right.
In 2010. Just to name a few, we had Kanye West, who I never have been a huge fan of his, but everyone knows his album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted.
Yeah, that was that year.
Fantasy, that
Beautiful
album,
Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Beautiful, yeah, whatever. I just had to read it because I honestly didn't know the name of the album, but I know the album cover, and that was a huge, huge album. Still is to this day. It's considered, I guess, at this point, a classic. But you had the Suburbs by Arcade Fire. You had LCD Sound Systems, what we all thought was going to be their last album, which is This Is Happening, which is one of my all-time favorite albums, personally. Yeah, Vampire Weekend's very underwhelming second album debut, which I always kind of hated. Mm-hmm. Contra. Joanna Newsom. Yeah, of course, the Black Keys hit it big that year. That's when they broke through with Brothers. I mean, we still hear those songs to this day. Yeah, so we'll be tackling music as well, which...
if I remember correctly, it was a huge year in popular music. You had Bruno Mars, his debut album came out that year.
Yeah, this will be a great way to kind of see our age gap too, because the music I was into was probably way different than the
it's probably very different. But
I was hitting like hardcore, like indie rock at that point in my life, whereas you were probably a little bit more on the pop side of things, maybe.
Yeah, I've never been I've never been as knowledgeable about music as I am about maybe some other topics like...
Which I was obsessed with it.
Right.
Especially at that age, at 26, mid-20s, that was...
But I'm in the time of life where there's high school dances and proms and stuff, so the types of things that are relevant to my memory, and I'm going on dates with girls listening to the radio, and like those are the kinds of things that are,
of course,
that like fall into my memory. So like I remember Eminem's Recovery.
There you go.
Was a big album for me that year. Love the Way You Lie was on that. Not Afraid. Bruno Mars, Just the Way You Are was like the song that like all the guys were trying to like tell girls that that's how they felt about them.
And he's great. He's
a great.
As far as pop music goes, I'm not a huge pop music guy, but I've always loved most everything he's done, even the cheesy stuff.
Now, what about Adele? You big on Adele?
I actually love Adele. Yeah, even at the time, I was like, I mean, I wouldn't say I was listening to Adele's music at that point, like listening to her albums. But when I met Kat, 4 years later, that's when whatever her last one was, 21 came out, or 27, 26, I don't know, 25, whatever age she was at the time is what she names the albums. But
21.
21, is that what came out?
So 21 came out in January of 11.
Oh, okay, so
I think she probably would have released
some singles.
Rolling in the Deep during 2010.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, the first big single off that album.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was probably arguably more into music at that time in my life than I was movies. Because the restaurant that I was working at, I actually had control of all music played, which I was very proud of. And I would load up a little iPod for the restaurant with all my music that I loved. So mainly like indie rock and just some like off the wall stuff that you would never hear in any other restaurant or public place. So I would always get the customers coming in, music playing. I would oftentimes play it too loud, and people being like, it brought so much joy to my heart when people would be like, "What is this? Who is this?" And I could explain it. So yeah, I was
and then
very
hopefully encourage a download or a purchase of those bands that maybe don't.
And I was just I was so into discovering new music and being ahead of the curve on all that stuff. So yeah, music will be a fun thing to discuss for sure in the year of 2010. Yeah,
we may have to hunt down a guest for a music episode to kind of get in some different perspectives about different genres and stuff. And I think that'd be good. So we'll talk about that during. The good thing with the movie calendar is it's always easy to kind of track throughout the year. We'll work music into some conversations during the dull months where a lot of I think in this time of year in the movie industry tends to be called Dumpuary because January and February a lot of studios will just release the trash that they have no faith in.
I feel like over the years though that's really kind of changed where you see
it's shifting a little bit.
Yeah, you get like some really good movies coming out in February and March. Like we just saw this month with The Invisible Man.
Yeah.
It was a huge hit, and that was supposed to be some shitty
good movie. I thought.
Oh, did you see it?
I saw it.
Shit, man, I want to see it.
It was really good.
It was supposed to be some, Johnny Depp vehicle where it was. He was originally going to be like the Invisible Man superhero for
part
DC.
of the Universal Monster thing they were trying to do.
They completely flipped the script and went with a more serious tone with it, and which I think looks like they made the right decision.
Good stuff starting to come out in February. A month that I always typically associate with just shitty movies is September. So we'll see how that goes this year, but September just tends to be there's this weird lag period between the summer movies and the Oscar awards type of movies that are going to come later.
We'll also talk a little bit about television, a little 2010 television, which I'm looking at now.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun because that's right around the time before streaming takes off.
Yeah, and for me, like I was saying earlier, I wasn't really into watching television shows, and I'm looking at the shows now, and I'm like, I didn't watch any of these. Breaking Bad, Mad Men.
You never watched Breaking Bad?
Nope. Mad Men.
That's a shame.
My wife, it's her favorite show is Mad Men, one of her favorite shows of all time. So I have watched it since, but not. I mean, only the first season.
Yeah,
30 Rock was big at the time. 30 Rock, which I actually really love, but I didn't watch until later.
I'm in the middle of a 30 Rock rewatch right now.
It's so good.
It's so funny.
So good.
I still I think it's the funniest show that I've ever watched. It's just endless jokes.
We could easily do a full episode on 30 Rock.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Kat could be our guest because it is her all-time favorite show.
It's unbelievable.
She was like...
And I guess, it brings up a good point because most of these shows, especially for people that fall into my age range, we didn't catch these things until later. We don't watch TV live now, really, and back then it wasn't really the case either. But once all these things came to Netflix, they got second lives. I remember, we'll talk about it in a couple years probably, but I remember Arrested Development getting that big bump from streaming that forces them to do a new season like 8 years after cancellation.
Yeah.
And 30 Rock, Breaking Bad, Parks and Recreation.
Of course, which was huge around my area where I was working. It was being filmed The Walking Dead.
Yeah, The Walking Dead was probably very early in its run at the time.
Oh, yeah, because it's, I think it's on like 11 or 12 seasons at this point.
2010. It was,
That's when it started.
It premiered.
Boom.
Which
is a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, it's evolved. And that's another show that I watched 2 years after it came out.
So I only watched the first season ever.
Okay.
And I was done after that because I was so tired of zombie shit. I was just like,
yeah.
I don't know, man. It got old to me. And then you got all these like, terrible zombie movies like after it, except for Zombieland. I like that one.
I probably made it 6 seasons. I don't know. I went a while with it. I enjoyed watching it because it's something we don't get a lot anymore, is the communal viewing experience.
Yeah. And
I think Game of Thrones maybe was from around that time.
I think I was watching Boardwalk Empire because my roommate would watch that. So that is a show that I watched in 2010. Louis. I liked Louis. Of course.
Yeah, which is hard to talk about now.
Of course, yeah. You can't like Louis anymore, but I loved it at the time.
So Game of Thrones came a year later, which is an interesting touchstone in this era of TV where everything is binged, so little is experienced live in big group settings. And, I liked The Walking Dead for that reason, where friends would gather, especially I think I was a freshman in college when I started watching that, and friends would gather down in the community living space and watch it on Sunday nights. And whether you were into it or not, it was nice to just have people to experience it and watch it with.
Justified's another big one. People were really into that. Which
that's a blind spot of mine. That's a show I've always wanted to watch.
And I'm kind of surprised I didn't watch it at the time because I'm kind of a sucker for westerns, and I was also I was really into remakes of westerns at the time. So 310 to Yuma, which came I think a couple years before, but then the year 2010 was True Grit.
Yeah,
which I absolutely loved.
And
then of course
Coen
Brothers were on fire at that moment.
That's a movie that's a blind spot of mine. I am a fan of the Coen Brothers, and for some reason that movie just always escaped me.
You haven't seen True Grit?
I've not.
Ooh, yeah.
So I'm excited to check that out.
It's fantastic. It's far and away better than the original with John Wayne, which I've never been a John Wayne fan, but
Friday Night Lights was big then. I don't know if you ever
I didn't watch that.
Watched that.
No.
That was a show that
perfect show for a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
That's in high school about high school football.
It is a teen show, but it was someone that like me that's obsessed with football. It kind of checked all the boxes that I was interested in at the time.
So at your age, in that year when you were 17, when I was that age, I was in the band. I was in the marching band.
Okay.
So I was kind of a geek, nerd, whatever you want to call it. But I was not into football. I didn't care. Didn't care about the high school football. As the jocks would make fun of the geeks or nerds, we would make fun of the jocks. So it's I definitely didn't care about the show about high school football.
About high school football.
However, I did, and the reason the show was launched was because of the very successful movie, which I actually liked a lot. The movie was really good.
Yeah.
Friday Night Lights. But no, never watched the show once.
It'll be interesting to look back on that year and think about not only what ended around that time, but what came out, what was debuting. And I've been thinking a lot about Modern Family, which is in my opinion, we're getting that last wind of the long-running sitcom. That's something that, when I was growing up, Friends was extremely relevant because it was something that my family was super into. We would watch it.
When you were like way younger, right?
Yeah, when
Friends... I was obsessed with Friends when I was younger too, but I was so that was mid-90s to...
Friends ended in 2003, I think, so 10.
Yeah.
Watching Friends with my family on Thursday nights. I remember that pretty vividly, but sitcoms nowadays, they're just not the same as they were. I think there's probably some shows that have lasted for a while, but they're just not in the conversation.
I think that
quite as much.
I think that genre is kind of dying, really. I mean, with streaming and everything, and laugh tracks and all that, you got, I feel like the last really significant shows that ended recently were like Big Bang Theory, which I always hated, or How I Met Your Mother. Those were kind of the last of their kind. You see shows trying to emulate what it was like in the past with those sitcoms, but they just don't have as much demand anymore, so which is why we don't really see them. And
right.
The laugh track is all but dead.
Now I'm looking here at shows that debuted in 2010. Did you ever watch Parenthood?
No.
That's one that I watched much, much later. But that was a show that I did not think I would have any interest in. It's not necessarily a great show, but it's something that you can't stop watching. It's just addictive and good.
Who are the actors in that?
Craig T. Nelson is like
right.
the patriarch of the family, and Lauren Graham from Gilmore Girls is involved, and Peter Krause, who I don't know if he's still in 911, which is going on right now, but. And then Mae Whitman, who's currently she's in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which came out in 2010, currently in a show called Good Girls.
Ooh, Downton Abbey. That was a big one. I mean, I never watched it, but that's been huge for the last decade, because they just came out. Yep.
Yeah. It was definitely had its fans. I wasn't one of them. It just always seemed like something that I wouldn't relate to or have interest in. But
the reboot of Hawaii Five-0 happened. Which is that still going on? Oh my god.
It looks like it ended this year.
Wow.
So
full decade.
A full decade.
We get to talk about Hawaii Five-0 for the next 10 years.
Good for them. Yeah, so TV was certainly different then. I think House of Cards maybe came out in 2012, and that's the first big streaming sensation. And I think that's where peak TV lives right now. HBO, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu. That's pretty much where it lies.
Yep. Of course, now we're getting newer ones like Disney Plus.
Yeah, they're trying to get in on the action.
And that's where Marvel's moving to now. Now that phase whatever is over, 4, 3, 4, whatever it is.
Phase 27 and a half.
Now their next phase is going into streaming.
And their next phase is like probably gonna get pushed back potentially, because I don't know if Black Widow's gonna come out. That'll be. I guess we'll see on all that. That's when, if this lockdown on the movie industry pushes into summer, then that's when it's going to be just really
weird.
Fucked.
Yeah,
because everyone's going to be fighting for those big release dates in the fall.
I gotta tell you though, now that we've seen Endgame and it's over essentially, these movies like Black Widow coming out.
Yeah,
I don't give a shit. I don't want to see it. I don't care. I'll see it. I'll see it when it's on like Disney Plus. But I could care less about Black Widow's origin story.
I agree in principle. I am more or less out on Marvel, but Black Widow...
I'm good. I'm satisfied.
Black Widow looks good.
Yeah, it's alright.
It looks pretty good. I don't know. I like... Florence Pugh is in it. She had a great year last year with Little Women and Midsommar, and I'm kind of excited to see if Marvel can do like a bottled movie that doesn't feed the bigger universe and is just about a character.
Like what Guardians of the Galaxy was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I liked
it is more grounded. Like, obviously Black Widow doesn't have crazy powers or live in this, like...
Right.
Live in outer space.
She's like a female Batman. That can fight really well.
So, I hope it's good. I'm not as into, like, this Eternals stuff they're doing later this year because it's... I loved Guardians of the Galaxy, but I'm not as invested in Marvel's quote-unquote cosmic universe.
Yeah, I do like the idea of them going into, like, episodic streaming episodes, like the Falcon thing that they're doing with Disney Plus. I think, what is it, the Falcon?
Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, like, that sounds cool to me. I love, like, Captain America Winter Soldier was one one of my favorite Marvel movies. I thought when I saw it in the theater, I was like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah, and they're doing WandaVision, which will be interesting. It's like a Scarlet Witch and Vision have sort of a 1950s domestic show where Wanda Maximoff has envisioned this. This is what I hear. I don't know for sure. It's not out yet, but it's supposed to be sort of she's created this universe where Vision never dies in Infinity War, and they get to like live happily ever after as this domestic partnership in like 1950s sitcom environment.
So it's like a Matrix in a sense, or
yeah.
Or like what Captain America does at the end of Endgame, where he
rewrites the timeline.
Ends up he's just like chilling with his wife,
Agent Carter,
which I had somewhat issues with. But
some gripes.
That's another.
I thought it was a fitting ending, but we'll talk about Avengers Endgame in 9 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just try to zero in on 5 movies from 2010 that we would say are our absolute favorites.
Yeah, let's do. You do your top 5. I'll do my top 5.
So I'll start with number 5.
We don't need to go too much depth with any of them yet either, right? Because that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, and this is one. Yeah, this is one that I think you like a lot too. Is Black Swan.
Oh yeah,
and that's a movie that I actually saw for the first time quite recently. So it's not something that I'll be able to reflect all that much on how I felt about it in 2010. But for all intents and purposes, it was phenomenal. It's the type of storytelling that I'm obsessed with, which is like the psychological terror and just really breaking you down by putting you into this character's mindset. And
I was telling you before we hit record, I actually remember every moment of seeing this movie in 2010 because I was in New York visiting my brother and his wife at the time. They just had their first kid. And I went to one of these theaters in the middle of the city that just like shows one movie for like 2 months. And it was Black Swan. And I went in there by myself. I walked the streets of New York. First time I'd ever really been there. And stumbled into the theater, unexpectedly, like, oh, Black Swan, I want to see that. And I sat in that theater by myself, with very few other people in there watching it because it was late. And I was totally into it, totally immersed into that story. And she was incredible. She won an Oscar for that movie, so...
Yeah, that'll certainly be relevant at the Oscars conversation. Yeah. And this is something that I want to do at the end of the year is look back on the Oscar winners, maybe have a debate of whether or not those were justified wins or not. There's certain things about that year that I remember, such as the King's Speech beating The Social Network for Best Picture that drove me insane.
Which I never saw or had any desire to see.
It just drove me insane that was the result. But I certainly think Natalie Portman was deserving, and Mila Kunis, I think, is incredible in that movie.
And let's not forget about the scene.
The scene is something that I saw way before I saw the movie because I was 17.
Oh man!
So of course that was something that made its rounds in a high school.
Anyone listening that has seen Black Swan knows exactly what we're talking about. Anyone that has not seen Black Swan and is listening, then just go see Black Swan and you'll know.
But without spoiling the movie, what the scene means in the story is so good, and on so many levels, and the things that it implies about the main character's psychosis is just really fascinating. That movie does so much with your mind in terms of playing tricks on where you think it's going.
I want to rewatch this now. I have it on Blu-ray over there.
Yeah, I mean it's something I'll rewatch too. I just think that it's really something special, and I'm not like a huge Darren Aronofsky fan. He's done some movies that I really like. Some like Mother with an exclamation point that I found a little bit too much for my liking.
I love him though. But, he kind of fell off for me though. The last thing I saw from him was like maybe the one with Wolverine, which I loved.
Did he do a Hugh Jackman movie?
Yeah, it's really good, and I can't remember the name of it. But no, I love Darren Aronofsky. I mean, I haven't seen the Noah epic that he did or the Mother movie, but
yeah, he's
the Fountain. That's what it was.
The Fountain. He's an interesting director worth talking about.
Watch The Fountain. It's fantastic. What year did that come out?
2006.
Oh wow, so we're past.
We missed it. Yeah, this decade he had Black Swan, Noah, and Mother. That's about it. Yeah, so you're number 5.
Well, I'll go ahead because I'm pretty sure this is probably not on your list, and at least I didn't hear you mention it. Is 127 Hours. That movie was, again, it was another situation where I went in by myself. I was really into seeing movies by myself at that age. I didn't care. I was like, I'll go see whatever, because when you're younger, you're like, oh, I should be with someone, right? Like, this is lame. But at that point, I was like, no, man, I'll go see any movie by myself now. It's kind of, it was just a nice...
It's funny because I'm sort of the age now that you were then, and I'm now very into seeing movies by myself.
There you go.
I'm really into it now. Even though I'm like
fantastic.
Married and have someone that'll see movies with me, I'm like, I kind of just want to see this alone and sit in it myself.
Yeah, exactly. So I had that with 127 Hours, and the pacing of that movie, the music. Oh my god, the music is like one of my favorite things about it. And I thought James Franco was a strong contender for Best Actor. I thought he was incredible. I was a huge James Franco at the time, big Pineapple Express guy. So I thought this was a really great turn that he made with his acting. And the story, it's all true. In real life, the climber actually had all this footage.
Yeah.
So Franco had that. So you're really watching what actually happened. And it's so intense. The pacing's phenomenal. And I was just in tears by the end of the movie.
Just an emotional movie, too.
Oh, man.
Emotional movie, and that's certainly something that would fall into my honorable mentions.
Yeah, when at the end, dude, into the helicopter, and he's like, oh, you can barely... bawling, dude. And I was by myself again. Like,
hard.
In the theater,
it's... I would qualify it as one of those movies that's hard to watch because it is such a grueling experience to watch him go through this trauma.
I mean, I don't even...
His arm being stuck under a rock for 127 hours, as the title suggests. Really well acted, great cinematography choices in terms of putting the audience in the space.
Danny Boyle.
Yeah, Danny Boyle. And, he's coming... I'm pretty positive that's his first movie off winning the Oscar for Slumdog Millionaire.
Yeah.
Which I would put this movie ahead of Slumdog Millionaire personally.
Oh, I mean, I like Slumdog, but this was more like... Yeah, on a personal level, I connected way more with this one. And
it's... We'll talk more in depth later in the year, because it's obviously an Oscar player. James Franco is nominated.
It's a one-man show.
It's a one-man show.
There's some flashbacks in it with his friends and girlfriend.
It's something I've not seen since that year.
But for an actor to carry a movie for whatever it was, 90-plus minutes, it was impressive.
I don't know if you ever saw Ryan Reynolds' Buried.
Oh, yeah, I know that came out this year, too.
It's a movie that tried to emulate that feel.
I heard people actually like that movie, too, though.
It's not a bad movie.
Yeah.
It's not a bad movie. It's just a bit of a manipulative movie where, it definitely wants the audience to think and feel certain things.
Right.
And you're very aware that that's happening the whole time. Something that's probably equivalent in number of tears that you might shed, but very different in tone, is Toy Story 3.
Oh, yeah.
Which would be
and that wouldn't be on my list. But...
Which would be my number 4 movie of 2010, and just something that really is a testament to the age difference, probably.
Yeah.
Because...
I love Toy Story, but wouldn't have been on my radar that year. I think I saw it
Toy Story is very important to my childhood. It's something that I had all the toys. I was, as I first start getting into movies, it was very integral in that development and that passion. And I remember when Toy Story 3 was coming out, I was angry about it. I'm like, what do you need another one for? You're just going to ruin it with this big trend of making needless sequels that...
I had the trilogy, man.
Well, then they made Toy Story 4.
Which is fantastic.
It's great. I mean, it's... I might like it more than the third one, and I love the third one without question. I love it unconditionally, but it just meant a lot to where I was in my life at the time, graduating from high school, as a movie is being released about the process of graduating, leaving adolescence behind, and transitioning into more adult things. Yeah, when Andy leaves Woody behind and he says "so long, partner" at the end, it's just it's hard not to just fall into complete puddle. But yeah, I mean, it's an amazing franchise that I think really is batted 1,000 in my opinion. All 4 movies are terrific.
No argument there.
It's good enough to be in my top 5.
I like it. So, for coming back to me for number 4, Black Swans, we've already mentioned Black Swan, which is definitely in my top 5. I have to go, and I know that I don't think this one's in yours either. Would be Hot Tub Time Machine. That movie was like a renaissance for John Cusack, who I absolutely loved and had a major obsession with growing up. Growing up with his movies, The Sure Thing, Better Off Dead, Hot Pursuit, Say Anything, The Grifters,
High Fidelity.
Well, of course, High Fidelity, and which actually High Fidelity is like Rob, his character in the book is like in the movie is the same age as me when I'm like trying to figure all my stuff out with relationships and all that jazz. But huge Cusack fan. He had done some really bad movies between I think it was like between Serendipity and Hot Tub Time Machine. He did like stuff like Must Love Dogs and like straight to like video, like just not good movies. So,
stuff that would be like straight to Redbox.
And he was kind of getting off the whole, romantic comedy, like Charmer, as I mentioned to you earlier, that how the way he kind of like molded the way I would talk to girls growing up. I would kind of try to emulate the way John Cusack would do it, kind of like neurotic and weird but funny and charming. And
the Lloyd Dobler.
The Lloyd Dobler, yeah. And I was just really disappointed in a lot of the films that he had made, because he kind of gotten off that like charming romantic comedy character and made these. He was like a bad guy in movies, and he was just doing these like creepy roles, and I was like, God, man, like
Speaking of that time in his career, I remember 1408. It's not a movie I ever saw, but I remembered a lot of the promotions for it. He did a movie though called Identity.
I was about to mention it.
You're gonna mention Identity?
So like that right there.
Yeah.
I'm like, which I liked. Okay, it was a good movie.
It was just. It was a pretty. What I always remember about Identity is it's a hilarious trailer where it's like 9 people are stranded at a motel.
Yeah.
And they're all they're sitting in the lobby and they're like, my birthday's April whatever. Like, my birthday's April whatever.
Yeah.
My birthday's April whatever. And then John Cusack's like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and actually,
that's like the conceit of that that thriller.
Yeah, and I actually really like 1408 too. So it wasn't all bad, but my favorite Cusack, the charmer, the romantic guy, the guy that you wouldn't necessarily think would get the girl, but he gets her in the end, and that's what Hot Tub Time Machine was. Finally, he came back to that world. That movie to me, I even got my buddy and I got a free screening to see it before it got wide release. Mm-hmm. We got to see it in I think it might have been Atlantic Station or something, because we were going to Georgia State at the time. Oh man, it was perfect. And to me, it was a perfect movie. It was for exactly what it was. It was
used to very silly, in a way in the vein of the stoner comedy type of genre. And that from a conceptual standpoint, it's very silly to be like, oh, 4 guys go in a hot tub, and it takes them back to the 80s.
Yeah. Like 1986, I think, or something like that.
And that's very much a comedy people of the era type of movie.
Yeah.
Because you have Cusack as the lead, but then there's Craig Robinson, who's on The Office at the time.
Well, and really, and you couldn't do it without Cusack, really, because it was parodying his own 80s films.
Yeah, it was kind of the point of it. It was a parody of his legacy as an on-screen heartthrob through that period of time.
You even get the $2 reference. $2, which is from Better Off Dead, when I was the newspaper boy, $2 the whole movie or something like that. It's a perfect John Cusack rom-com, absurd, great writing.
I'm looking back at the cast, and Sebastian Stan, the Winter Soldier himself, is in this movie.
Chevy Chase.
This is something that
Crispin
Glover. For some reason I have memory of seeing this, and I'm not sure if I have.
Oh, dude, it's so good.
So I'm gonna have to check it out in time for the next recording, because that was a March release, 2010.
Dude, and Crispin Glover, kind of
Back to the Future.
Back to the decade.
Yeah.
He is phenomenal in it.
He's phenomenal in Back to... you know how long it took me to realize that he's actually younger than Michael J. Fox? Even though he's playing his dad in the movie.
Well, I guess he was playing him at the same age.
But he was playing him as the dad too.
That's true.
It's funny to think about that.
Yeah, his storyline in Hot Tub Time Machine is hilarious. Maybe the funniest thing in the movie, honestly. It's great.
So,
all right,
my number 3 is Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
perfect movie for you at that age? I mean,
I
because I didn't see this movie until it may have been a year or two after, and I couldn't believe that I had not seen it yet. I was like, what the hell was I thinking?
well, I love it.
It's so good.
I love Edgar Wright. You know, I think that his Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, World's End trilogy is great, and Baby Driver's great. Scott Pilgrim is his masterpiece.
Yeah, it's a perfect movie.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just like the physical comedy, the jokes that he's able to tell using only the camera. It's phenomenal. And you look at...
Ooh, coins.
Especially for someone... You know, I'm not someone that read the comics necessarily, but I'm into video games, and I know that you play video games, and it's the best video game movie.
Yeah.
That many people have tried to make adaptations of video games, but this movie understands what it's like to be in a video game.
Yeah.
I'm blown away that no other game to movie adaptation has attempted to do this, just like make it feel like a game. They try to make it feel like a movie, but it's not designed to do that necessarily.
Yeah.
But Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is hilarious and very innovative in terms of the way it executes its comedy. And some of the jokes are done with simple shot construction. Mm-hmm. They're able to, create a moment that's very funny. And I think a lot about, we'll talk about the other guys later this year, but Adam McKay is someone who's a big figure in comedic filmmaking, especially during the 2000s. And he got a little more prestige-y in the 2010s, but that style of comedy is just driven by jokes. And as funny as those movies are, there's something to be said for pure cinematic comedy.
Yeah. Stuff
that you could not do if not in the film medium. And I think Wright is just really good at doing
Well, and
that.
Michael Cera is a genius. I think really
it's his best performance, probably.
I think he's, as far as acting goes, and the way his comic timing and his shtick, like the character, he pretty much plays like the same kind of guy every time. But
it has so many famous people before they were famous.
Yeah.
Brie Larson's in it, Anna Kendrick's in it, Mary Elizabeth Winstead,
Brandon Routh.
Yeah, Brandon Routh he's the vegan, right?
Yeah.
The vegan police.
McCulkin?
Yeah, Kieran Culkin, who is big on Succession right now. So great cast.
Visually stunning.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it in my top 5, only because I just didn't see it that year, and it had no real relevance to me that year,
Mm-hmm.
but I was always pissed when I saw it later, and I was like, oh man, I can't believe I haven't seen this yet.
I think it's pretty slept on.
It is.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking back, it's arguably the best movie made that year. Really. So I've covered 3 of mine now, right? So
yeah, you talked about Hot Tub Time Machine, Black Swan, and 127 Hours.
Yeah.
We might end up having. I don't know if my 2 are going to fall into your 2, but
I know we're going to both talk about The Social Network and Inception. Right?
Yeah, that's. I think for both of us, that's kind of the 2 of the big movies of that year.
But for me, before we hit those, and I'll let you take those 2.
Yeah.
I'll take one of them because I remember Inception really well, and Social Network. I know I saw it in the theater, and I thought it was really good. But I'll keep it out of my list. I'll let it stay in yours because for me, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, The Other Guys.
Yeah.
I loved that movie so much.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing it with my dad. My dad and I went to the theater to see it, and I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was, even though it was this kind of like silly buddy cop movie, or like anti-buddy cop movie, because Mark Wahlberg really hates Will Ferrell's character the whole time. But I just thought the pacing again was great with that one. The acting, even though it's a silly comedy, like Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell's back and forth was brilliant comedy. And
it's kind of Mark Wahlberg's first attempt to get into that comedic zone, and he tries it, later in his career with Ted. I know he does. Him and Ferrell they unite again for the Daddy's Home movies, which are just kind of an abomination.
Yeah. But no, and then as we mentioned before, we hit record before we talked about the housing market and the crash, and was heavily about that period in time.
Yeah, it was about something for sure.
Yeah, Adam McKay really stresses on the whole what the banks and the stock market and the Wall Street's doing to our
Yeah.
economy and greedy fuckers. Oh, and also the actor that I love, what's his name? Steve Coogan.
Oh yeah, Steve Coogan
Yeah.
is he's like kind of the bad guy.
Yeah,
more or less.
he's like, he's not a bad guy, but he's kind of caught
He's
in the middle.
like,
of
yeah,
everything.
he's like caught in the
He's
middle
like
of the bad guys.
sleazy lawyer. He was phenomenal. I love him.
Yeah, that's Farrell and Wahlberg are great in that movie.
in the beginning with
The Rock and
Rock
Samuel L. Jackson, the aim for the bushes.
They just like jump onto the concrete.
And you got, there goes my hero.
Yeah.
It's really funny. And what I remember most about that movie is how amazing Michael Keaton is as the chief.
Oh,
I love everything Michael Keaton
keeps
does.
accidentally quoting TLC.
Yeah, his comedic timing is
I don't know
just...
what you're talking about. What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
it's so funny. And every time he has an interaction with Will Ferrell, and Will Ferrell keeps wanting to like force this buddy relationship between them, and he's like, "Don't call me Gene.
Yeah.
I'm Chief or I'm Captain or whatever it is."
And then they visit him at the Bed Bath and Beyond.
That'll be a good one to revisit too, because that's one that's very much of the time.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah.
It's as far as comedies go, and even like the undertone of it, right? With Adam McKay, he clearly had a message.
Yeah.
And he did that with, even though it was a silly comedy, it really resonated well with the time. So, yep.
Yeah, that's a great choice, and you mentioned it, but it's a tough decision for what I would say is my number one of that year. I think I might consider The Social Network to be the best movie of the entire 2010s decade, because it's just,
There was a lot of people with that on their list.
yeah, it's
Which I'd kind of forgotten about it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good. I had that
and
over there.
it's one that I certainly saw in 2010 and I liked it, but I didn't think about it twice. But then I rewatched it probably 3 years ago, and I just saw all of these things that I somehow had missed the first time. And that's what's great about this exercise, is some of these movies that we've not seen in forever, you know, you watch it at a later point in life and you just have a new appreciation for certain aspects of it. And you have Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher, who are two of the best craftsmen in the industry, collaborating on this.
And they're both on fire.
They're on fire at this time.
Sorkin's off at West Wing,
And Fincher,
he's off,
you
like,
know,
Fight Club and all his phenomenal movies. From
yeah,
the past
he's
decade.
just like making hit after hit. He makes Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which is not one of his better films. It's certainly an interesting film.
Panic Room.
He makes Panic Room a little bit earlier in the 2000s, but
Still,
he makes
still pretty.
he makes Benjamin Button, and
It was very successful.
he gets into the Oscar conversation for one of the first times in his career, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But then follows it up with The Social Network, which is just as relevant as it gets in 2010, and especially now. You know, we're not going to get too political on this podcast, but it's hard not to acknowledge the way that politics forms art. Mm-hmm. And I think as we get into 2026 and 2027 and those years, and we look back at the art that came out around the time of the 2016 election, you're going to see a lot of art speaking to that turmoil in the world. As the Facebook scandal that associated that 16 election unfolded, it was just hard to not look back at The Social Network and be like, this movie was telling the story. Like it was creating this story about social conformity and how people formed their own opinions. Mm-hmm. It's extremely well written, and Andrew Garfield's performance is something that I always think about. He's got that great scene with the, "You better lawyer up, asshole, because I'm coming for all of it."
Yeah.
And it's Eisenberg's great as Zuckerberg, and
Of course, the twins as well.
yeah, Armie Hammer.
Armie Hammer. Which you were expecting him to like just take off after this movie, and he never really does. Although he's still great. I mean, I don't know.
Justin Timberlake.
Oh yeah, as Napster
Sean
guy.
Parker, and he's really sensational, and he's not someone who I typically think of as a great actor, but
I love him.
Yeah.
He's an okay actor, but he's good enough for stuff like this, right?
Yeah, so the Social Network, you know, there's this like line between what's your favorite and what do you think is the best.
Yeah.
And I would always consider Social Network to be among the best. It's just so well done. I'll call it number 2 for the sake of what I'm talking about here, which is like personal favorites.
Well, I think
but it's just a well done film.
Yeah, and I think you and I would both agree that what's on both of our lists at number one would be Inception.
Yeah.
So, yeah, between those two, Social Network, I think you're correct. It was definitely the best movie of the year, but Inception was
still incredibly well made film. You know, it's like not to diminish the quality that movie contains, but
entertaining.
It's so entertaining.
It's the greatest. Not just of that year, but
yeah. And we talked about it. We talked about it a little bit earlier in this episode, but it's just one of a kind in terms of viewing experience. You know, when you see it for the first time, it's got one of those endings where you just like remember what you felt when you saw it.
That wobbly little
top.
And you know, it's got a lot of haters too. Like
it's found its critics as time, which tends to happen when things are big cultural touchstones.
The guys on the rewatchables, like most of those guys do not like this movie.
Yeah,
there's like there's one or two guys that love it, and then there's like I think Bill Simmons isn't a big fan. Or it's
certainly a movie that you can pick nits, to use one of their terms, it's not perfect because it's about dream space and these details that don't have any sort of real world's foundation.
Yeah.
But the dude made Heat Inside Your Mind.
Yeah.
Michael Mann's Heat Inside the Mind is what Christopher Nolan's making in Inception.
Yeah.
And it's so cool, for lack of a better word. It's such a cool movie.
Yeah, that was
and the performances are great.
That was the beginning of Tom Hardy.
Beginning of Tom Hardy.
He'd already done Bronson, but still, like, no one really knew who he was until this movie, I feel like.
Right. Ellen Page is in there as sort of the student.
She's Ellen Page.
She's the student trying to like learn the ways of the world.
And she's great. Yeah, she's perfect for the role. Yeah.
She's great, and Marion Cotillard is the dead wife, which is a character in every Christopher. She's a character in every Christopher Nolan movie. Is the dead wife?
Is she?
I think if you go back and watch his movies, you'll see that like he loves doing shit to the wife. He loves killing the wife. Which, you know, to reference, it's not the wife, but like the Dark Knight trilogy, Rachel serves that role.
Yeah.
And he really loves to like create characters that are tormented by lost love and their own torture with how that occurred. I think that the last, I want to say like 12 minutes of Inception, from the, you know, spoiler alert for Inception, from the moment they wake up on the plane till the moment he lays the top down, are like the most rewatchable 12 minutes of film I can remember in my lifetime. You have Hans Zimmer's Time in the background, that score just really hammering home. It's such a fun movie.
And I love, the wobbly top and the not knowing if it's going to fall or not. And just, I know, I'm a huge fan of movies at the end, just like cutting to black. I love it. I love that. I've always been, I did it when I was making short films in college. I loved cutting to black.
Same here.
I love it. I'll you know.
It's just a style that leaves a lasting impact on the audience if the movie worked for you.
Yeah.
Certain movies, if they're not working for you and they do that and you're like, what the hell? Like this is some bullshit. But if it's working for you, it's a great way to leave your audience wanting more.
Yeah, and I'm so okay with the whole like leave it to your own interpretation. If you want to believe that he's still in a dream world, believe that.
Yeah.
If you want to believe he made it back and he's in reality, believe it. It doesn't matter.
And I think you and I are kind of in agreement about the ending of that movie, where it's the point is that you don't know.
You don't know.
That's the point.
Leonardo DiCaprio doesn't know.
Yeah, there's no answer. The point is that whether it was real or it was dream, the character's happy, and that's
why the movie's so great.
What it's about.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Inception more in a couple of months. That's a movie I could talk about for probably 3 hours by itself.
Sure.
But that's our 5 favorites now. I'll be interested to see when the year ends.
Yeah,
as we've rewatched some of these and kind of like gone back through, do we shift opinions at all about?
And there's obvious ones that we're leaving out that we'll talk a little bit about, but won't go as in depth with some of the ones we just mentioned. But like obviously there was The Town, which was a big movie that year. There was The King's Speech, which won all the stupid awards.
Town was big. King's Speech.
Easy A.
Tony Scott's Unstoppable, which is just a crazy fun action movie. Let Me In, which is a...
Did either one of us put Shutter Island on our list? I don't think we did.
Shutter Island wouldn't be in my top 5, but it's certainly right around there. It's a movie I really love, and
The Fighter.
The Fighter's one that needs... Yeah, The Fighter...
Christian Bale.
Easy A, which is one I think about a lot, is like it launched the career of Emma Stone, who's one of the bigger A-list actresses we have right now, who's doing a lot of great work today.
There was a Harry Potter movie. Which one was that?
2010 would be The Deathly Hallows Part 1, which is underrated in the Harry Potter franchise. Again, that probably fits into my age range very well because...
I don't care about Harry Potter.
Yeah. Harry Potter came out... The movie came out in 2001. You know, it really like fit like people of my demographic and my age range grew up with those characters.
I think the only one I ever saw or liked was the time travel one with Gary Oldman.
Oh, that's Alfonso Cuarón. It's the best one. It's really good.
I watched it twice on mushrooms, twice in a row, like back
to back. That's. I mean, I genuinely think Prisoner of Azkaban is a phenomenal movie. Like, not even a great Harry Potter movie, just like a great movie. Period.
Yeah.
Deathly Hallows Part 1 is, I think, underrated. I think both of, the entire David Yates run of Harry Potter is really well done. I can get into Harry Potter later.
Yeah,
that fits more into my demographic. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was also, obviously, I mentioned Blue Valentine, which is a big Ryan Gosling, Michelle Williams movie that year, but it wasn't really as successful as it wanted to be. But I was at Cannes Film Festival that year, where it was released, and that was like one of the biggest movies talked about. And I actually had an opportunity to see it in the theater at Cannes. I got in there, I sat down, gonna watch it, and then we had some friends that couldn't get in, and instead of staying, I think something annoyed me. I don't know, something about the situation annoyed me where I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm gonna go join back up with my friends since they couldn't get in, and we ended up like going to a party or something. But so I actually didn't end up seeing it at Cannes. I saw it later in the year, and I thought it was okay. It was very depressing. I don't think I've ever watched it since. And then also the big Robin Hood remake with Russell Crowe was that year, which was we can talk about flops.
Right. That was a big flop.
Yeah, we can go into some flops, maybe one episode, and that was definitely up there with maybe the biggest flop of the year.
You know what else was that year?
I still haven't seen it.
You know what else was that year was MacGruber.
Oh, I love MacGruber.
Yeah, that's such a crazy lifestyle that movie's had, where it's one of the biggest flops of all time, but it has this cult following.
MacGruber was a flop?
It was a huge flop.
Oh, I wouldn't expect it to.
It was a huge flop. I mean, it was...
I wouldn't expect it to like go in thinking like, oh, this movie's gonna make millions.
No, I mean, it's not a movie you'd really think of it in terms of
it's
making
hilarious.
a bunch of money, but it made $4 million on its opening weekend, and not like $8 million by the time its run ended. It just made no money at all. It was a big flop, but it's just a funny movie.
It's so good, yeah.
I think as the decade ended, and I saw a lot of people look at like what was the best movie year of the 2010s, and this one pops up a lot. It's just got a lot of great things to choose from. Maybe a little top loaded. Like there's probably 10 movies that are just...
You still talking about MacGruber?
It's just a great movie year, and it'll be interesting to look back at a lot of those as we go forward.
Yeah.
God, and there was some trash too as I'm scrolling through.
Oh yeah.
And the trash is always kind of fun to talk about because it's always interesting to talk about why movies were unsuccessful. Like what about them made them so bad.
Yeah, I think we've explained pretty well what our approach is here at Back to the Decade.
I think so too, and next time we will focus a little more on some specific topics as opposed to this one. We were kind of all over the place. As we go forward, I think you'll see the format start to take more shape.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for listening.
Cue the music.
Cue the music. We'll see you next time. Thanks.